Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Middle Ages. Good times, right? So, we're going to talk about war and plague. Talk about some really awful things that end the medieval period. The 1300s was a very nasty time to live in Europe. All the things that you thought were there to help you were actually just trying to kill you. So, not that much fun. King Philip IV of France. I've mentioned this guy before. He's the one who decided to shut down the Knights Templars. Well, King Philip IV of France kidnapped the Pope and forced him to respect French power instead of Italian power like most of the popes had done. The Pope died in 1305, and Philip forced the church to pick a Frenchman as the next pope. His name was Clement. Clement moved the headquarters of the church. Instead of being in the Vatican in Rome, which is in Italy, now the church is going to be run from southern France, a place called Avignon. So, Clement was the pope who moved the headquarters there, and Clement is the one who agreed with King Philip IV of France to get rid of the Knights Templar. After they burned the leader of the Knights Templar, Jacques de Molay, at the stake, you can spell it M-O-L-A-Y, Molay, Jacques de Molay, at the stake, the cathedral holding Clement's body before the funeral was struck by lightning, and his casket was badly burned. So de Molay pronounced a curse on the King of France and the Pope that they would both die within a year. They did, and Clement's casket was struck by lightning. In the 1370s, the College of Cardinals, the guys who get together and pick the next Pope, met in Rome, and they picked an Italian, Urban VI. This satisfied the people of Italy because they were very upset that the Pope had been a Frenchman and that the papacy had been run from France. But the problem was Urban wasn't a very polite fellow. He was blunt and brutal and wanted to change a lot of things about the church. So a lot of the cardinals, after they made him pope, thought, that might not have been a great move. They regretted it, and they decided to try to pick another pope. And this time the French got involved again and tried to help determine who the next pope would be. And they picked a Frenchman, Clement VII. But the problem was that Urban VI still claimed to be the pope. He said, no, you can't replace me. You voted for me. That was God's will that you voted for me. I'm your pope. You can't change it now. So there were two popes at the same time. Both of them claimed to be the legitimate pope in the eyes of God, and both of them did the big personal punishment that the church can do, excommunication. They both excommunicated the other. They both told the other that they were going to hell. And so, with two popes to choose from, European kings were able to pick and choose whoever they wanted to be loyal to. And a lot of countries picked and chose based on who their friends were picking or who their enemies were picking. For example, the French picked the French Pope, quite clearly, but the English hated France, and so they decided to support the Italian Pope. But Scotland hates England more than anybody else, and so Scotland decided to be loyal to the French Pope. So on and on and on. This huge division was called the Great Schism, S-C-H-I-S-M. The schism damaged people's confidence that God might actually be controlling the church. In 1414, the cardinals decided to meet again, and they wanted to pick a new pope and fire the first two. So they did. They picked a new pope, Martin V, and then they tried to fire the old pope. Yeah, it got weird. So the reputation and the authority of the church was badly damaged throughout this whole episode. Add to that the fact that there were new religious thinkers around who were saying that the church shouldn't automatically be trusted when it comes to religion, and that maybe we should go back to reading the Bible itself. Religious thinkers like John Wycliffe, W-Y-C-L-I-F-F-E, John Wycliffe, and also Jan Hus. They disagreed with the way that the church was running Christianity and said that instead you should go back to the original Bible. Wycliffe thought the church had become too rich and too powerful and was ignoring the rules in the Bible. He said you could ignore the church and you could just obey Jesus and believe in Jesus and get into heaven without the help of the Catholic Church. He even made a translation of the Bible in English to help people find their way to heaven without needing their local priest who would read it to them in Latin. Jan Hus did the same thing in Hungary, but he got tricked into being part of a church debate. They were going to have a conference and a debate, and they were going to let Jan Hus publicly announce what he believed in. But the church was never really going to let him do that. They made the offer and gave him safety, a promise of safety on the way there and on the way back. But when he arrived, they kidnapped him and they burned him at the stake. In 1347, a fleet of cargo ships bringing food to Italy also brought rats. And on those rats were fleas. And those fleas were infected with the plague, the Bubonic Plague, also named the Black Death. It left bruises under your skin that were black, and that's a big part of why it got the nickname the Black Death. It infected Italy, and then from Italy it swept all across the continent of Europe. Totally unknown to anything we might experience today, right? A massive disease spreading and shutting life down as you know it could never happen again. So, about 1/3 of all the people of Europe died from the Black Death. Somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of everyone in Europe died from the Black Death. People would get swollen bags of pus, because pus is like the body's side effect. It's the body's byproduct of trying to kick out an infection. And so the Black Death caused you to get big, like golf ball sized lumps of pus under your skin, in your armpits, in the crook of your neck, in the back of your knees, anywhere where the body creases. And our favorite place where the body creases, of course, is the crotch. And so you can expect balls of pus in your armpits, your knee pits, and your crotch and your neck. A lot of the ways that people died of the plague was that while they were working their average day's work, or even just sleeping, they would puncture one of those bags of pus and it would get infected. When one person in a household got the disease, everyone in the household was locked up. The place was completely boarded up. And only weeks later was it opened to see if anyone had survived. And if they survived, congratulations, you didn't die of the plague, even though we tried real hard to make sure you would. Anyway, everyone who had the money to, abandoned cities and towns and went out into the countryside, bringing the plague with them, just like what happened in Maine this summer when foreigners, not foreign, but like out-of-staters, came up and decided to enjoy our beaches and contact people who were local and spread the disease. Because there were fewer people available to work because of all these deaths, prices went up. As the plague left, serfs and peasants decided to rebel against the nobles sometimes. A lot of the time they ran away, and they ran to the cities and towns. And if you get to a city and town, how long do you have to stay there before you can declare yourself a free person and no longer under the control of the noble? Yeah? Yeah, do you remember? 1 year and 1 day. That's right. Many people lost faith in the church because it failed to keep them safe from the Black Death. Others decided to just party. Like, if life is so fragile and we could die at any time, just keep calm and shuck it. No, just go party. Just enjoy yourself to the fullest. And other people decided to blame people with different traditions, people who were unlike themselves, like the Jews. A lot of Europeans decided that the plague must be from the Jews, and the Jews were poisoning the wells in our towns and cities, and that's how we got sick. And so, more Jews died. And if you were living in England or France, let's up the ante a little, because disease and religious schisms aren't enough. Let's have full-blown war. Sweet. Okay. So, Hugh Capet of France had started a dynasty, like around the year 990 or something? And the last of his descendants, the last of the people in his dynasty, died in 1337. And their closest living relative appeared to be the King of England, Edward. And he claimed to be the rightful King of France. But this started a war, because the French were unwilling to have an English king in charge of their country. It lasted, this war, it was on again, off again, and it lasted for 125 years. And it's actually where we get a really, really rude hand gesture. We'll talk about that in a minute. Anyway. So the French knights assumed that in this war, they would have nothing to worry about. Because, let's face it, if you're a knight in medieval times, you have a horse, which keeps you away from most peasant attacks. You have a full suit of armor, and you have offensive weapons. I would say, if you want to do the math here, a medieval knight's chances of making it home from any given battle alive and unwounded were probably about 98%. All right? Probably about the same chance as a battlefield tank today coming out all right if all it's fighting against is infantry with nothing stronger than hand grenades, right? So, the French they assumed that they would march out into battle. All these dukes and kings and princes and all of these nobles and knights thought that they'd be just fine. They'd wade into battle, kill several hundred peasants, maybe have a couple of sword fights against other knights, maybe take one of them hostage, like kidnap an English knight off their horse and drag them back, and then tell the English king you'll sell them back to them, right? So these French knights and dukes and lords thought that they had just a fantastic chance of going into battle perfectly fine. But what they didn't realize was the English had developed a secret weapon. When England invaded France, they brought with them something that they had gotten from a previous invasion, when they invaded Wales. See, the Welsh had a particular tree called the yew tree, Y-E-W. And the yew tree's wood is really super bendy, and it was perfect for making bows. Not just normal bows, not just bows that the English had already been using for centuries. We're talking long bows, 5-foot long bows, with enough springiness so that if you pulled back to the maximum extent at the right angle so that gravity would assist it downward. You could penetrate battle armor with an arrow. And so the English took a bunch of archers with them into France when they invaded. And these archers were perfectly capable of slaughtering French knights on horseback. But the French didn't know it. Have you ever seen the movie Independence Day? You know, when the big spaceships come down and hover over the White House and then just blow it to pieces, right? And we didn't know this kind of technology existed. We had no idea they could do that. Well, that's what the French must have felt like on the morning of the Battle of Crécy in the year 1346. Because the English went in with their longbows, and the French were prancing forward. Knights, kings, dukes, princes, on horseback, just prancing forward, knowing they were going to make it home that night safely. Until the sky suddenly darkened. Darkened with arrows. Arrows that penetrated and killed thousands of French nobles and knights. It was a mass slaughter. It was like that White House blowing up in Independence Day. It was devastating to the French nobility. So, this happened again several times during the battles in France, all because of the longbow. The longbow, that effective English weapon. But, here's a side story here for you. Remember I told you we'd talk about a hand gesture? A really rude hand gesture? I'm giving you permission right here, right now. Go ahead and give me the one-fingered salute. Go ahead and flip me the bird. Go for it. Even if you're sitting in my class right now watching this, that's okay. You can flip me off, or you could flip off the screen. Either way, it's fine. You've probably done it before, even if you shouldn't have. But anyway, this hand gesture comes from a moment in this 125-year-long war. And that moment is the French had managed to capture some of the archers that the English were using. Now, remember how I told you that the bow from the yew tree was 5 foot long? Well, that bow takes years to get good at drawing back and finding the right angle for the right distance. It's an incredible skill, and it requires years of training. The French managed to capture some of those archers, and when they captured them, they chopped off these 2 fingers. And then they offered them back to the English without telling them those fingers were gone. They offered them back to the English and said, hey, you pay a whole bunch of ransom money, we'll sell you back your archers. Now the English thought that these archers were still going to be effective, so they bought them back, no matter what the price, only to discover that they would never be able to draw a bow again. Because these 2 fingers aren't strong enough, and this hand doesn't have the dexterity to do it. It hasn't been trained for it. Plus, you've got to hold the bow with your other hand, and with these 2 fingers gone, you just won't find the right balance. So, the next battle that the English fought against the French, when the French got close enough to see the English archers, remember, the English had a bunch more archers, so when the French got close enough to see the English archers showed off the 2 fingers that had been chopped off on their friends. Come here. Come and get it. You want these? Come get them. Because guess what? This is how you die today. These 2 fingers are how you die today. Come try and get them. That's what the English archers did. And from that moment on, this hand gesture is flipping somebody off in England, or Scotland, or Wales, or even Ireland nowadays, I think. So if you do this, and it can't just be like America where you hold up the middle finger and you just hold it still. You gotta wag it a little. These 2 fingers, you gotta wave them around. You gotta wag them. got to be angry. It's out of anger that you're doing this. So that's the equivalent of our middle finger in America. We are lazier than England, and so we don't like to wave it around, and we only use one finger, because two would use too much energy, apparently. But that's where we get our middle finger salute. That's exactly where our flipping someone off comes from. And just fun, right? So this is very different. This means V for victory, or it can also mean peace. But if you flip around peace and wave it, it's really not very peaceful. So, in that first battle, the English lost 200 soldiers, and the French lost 2,000. So 10-to-1 casualty ratio there. Calais, a French port city, surrendered to England, and England looked like they were going to win everything. But then, an 18-year-old peasant girl decided to come forward, saying that she was getting messages from the angels Michael and Gabriel and a Saint Catherine, I think, saying that these saints were talking to her and telling her she would save France from evil. She came forward and she told her local noble, who didn't believe her, but she managed to convince him. She convinced him by showing him where a famous sword that no one had seen in centuries was buried. She dug up this sword, saying that she was being guided by the angels to know where it was. And then that nobleman brought her to the king. He wasn't really the rightful king at this point. He was just claiming to be king. And he said, "A girl? A farmer's daughter? No, go away." And she said, No. I know I can tell you what is in your head. I can tell you what you dreamed last night. I can tell you your innermost thoughts. And so he said, all right, go for it. They went off in private, and when he came back, he said, she's been sent by angels. She's delivering God's message to us, and my army is now under her control. Obviously, a bunch of knights and dukes and nobles are going to be hesitant, are going to be sexist, are going to be resistant to the idea that this peasant girl might be in charge of their army, but they had to obey the king. And she won. Battle after battle after battle. She stopped an English siege of one of the most important French cities, Orleans. But then, things went bad for Joan of Arc. She was captured by Frenchmen who were on the English side. She had gone off by herself, trying to check out the landscape for the next battle, and she was captured by Frenchmen. And they turned her over to the English. And the English thought, well, we could kill her, but then the French would just all hate us for it. What if we turned her over to the Catholic Church? Because after all, she's claiming that she's getting messages from angels and God, and I bet the church won't approve of that. So they handed her over to the church, who put her on trial for not only for heresy, for claiming that she was getting messages from the angels and God, but also for wearing men's clothing and wearing men's battle armor and behaving like a man. She was forced to recant, to basically publicly declare that she wasn't really hearing messages from God and that she would never wear men's clothes again, etc., or else they'd kill her. So she did recant. She did say, I'm sorry, I wasn't hearing messages from God, etc., to save her life. But then, she was found in men's clothing after that. She was still in her prison cell, and she had men's clothing. And so the church said, by going back on your promise to never do it again, we're going to burn you at the stake. So Joan of Arc was burned at the stake for being a lapsed heretic, and that inspired the French to pull it together even more. And they ended up winning this war that went on for 125 years, known as the 100 Years' War. Because back then, math, 100 Years' War. So, the English quit in 1453, and the French won. The war led to a spirit of national patriotism in France, because they defeated the English invaders and they unified themselves. In England, they were also getting a sense of national unity, even though it was from losing. France became more powerful and more united, and temporarily England became depressed and fragmented and had what was called the War of the Roses. Now that feudalism and the Catholic Church were no longer the foundation of everyone's lives, what would replace those influences? Good question. So, next time, I think we're heading over to China for a while. Let's do that. Chinese history next.